I would like to call up Rav Bentzi Freeman. I know he probably wouldn't want me to say too much. But on that note, he's one person who personifies Emor Ma'at V'aseh Harbeh. Without further ado, Mr. Bentzi Freeman.
Good evening. By the way, I did not ask Yossi to keep it short. Yossi, get back up here. Good evening. First off, I'd like to start by thanking Yossi and the crew for the fantastic show that they put on this evening, this year. I made sure that I got a job to say a few words during the dinner just so I could take advantage of the amazing food. As they say in Eretz Yisrael, gewaldig, gewaldig. I'm here to make one point only. And that is as it relates to helping out a fellow Yid in business. Helping a person becoming successful and making more of a parnasa, and forgetting him that opportunity. The boy side, these past 3 months have once again proven irrefutably, as if we didn't know, that we, the Am HaNivchar, are the most distinct society on earth. We're totally on our own and must make it totally on our own. Yet to compensate, it seems that the Rebbeinu Shloilo has blessed Klal Yisrael with a certain midah in order to ensure its survival. It is key to our existence. Before Shem explained, there is one midah, one trait that is entirely indigenous to the Jewish nation, that doesn't exist in other societies. And that midah is chemla. Compassion, a new level of caring, a step above chesed and being kind. We say it every day in Moeda Ani. It's a midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it's what made this year in last week's parsha so exceptional. Vatachma lalav. It was how Chazal knew that she was a megayeres. She had that special Yiddish midah. So it's not just being nice, but actually means stepping up, stepping into the shoes of the person you're caring for, feeling their need as if it's your own, and facilitating that need. It requires a heightened level of sensitivity that only a Yid can experience, and not only results in v'alachta b'drachav and the arvus the Rebbeinu Shalom craves from his people, that ensures the physical and emotional sustenance of a nation whose members constantly go out of their way to look out for one another, to provide. I would like to give 2 real-life examples of how this relates to today's event, and then I'm done. I know this amazing person in New York, a Yid by the name of Moshe Friedman, whom I've had the schus of observing for many years, and who happens to be my father. He has an accounting firm that services the nursing home industry and is a bit of a businessman. He's many other things as well, but most importantly, he's constantly on the lookout to help people. And I'd like to give you 2 examples that I personally am aware of. Both incorporate chemla. Both incorporate the building blocks of our nation. I had occasion to meet a water conservation specialist. Still not sure what that is. A water conservation specialist named Yankee last year, who after playing Jewish geography heard I was the son of Moshe Friedman. He tells me, that man, he put me on the map. How so? It seems Yankee had done some work for my father around the house and mentioned he was looking for more work if my father hears of anything. 2 days later, my father calls him into the office and says, Yankee, I made a few calls to some of my clients, told them about you, gave you a plug, and they all want to hire you. You're in. However, I can only let you work for them on one condition. Just give them great service. That's all you want? Asked Yankee. That's all I want. Yankee's business flourished from that day on, and although he tried buying my father many gifts, my father always refused with the refrain, just continue to treat my clients well. Yankee today lives half the year in Florida and works only when he wants to. Auf uns alle gesagt. Case number 2. My father hired an accountant named Shlomi, who after a number of years left the firm to try his hand at business. He didn't accumulate too much, 5%, I believe, of a nursing home, and asked my father that he keep him in mind if a deal ever came up. A number of months later, my father bumps into Shlomi and asks, I may have a deal for you. Are you still interested? Of course. Says, my father, I happen to be a small partner in a nursing home, and some of the partners want to get out. Let's see if we can put something together. My father sat hours with Shlomi, laid out the deal, described some of the unrealized potential, and sure enough, a deal was struck. Before it was put to paper, 2 things happened. First, a partner changed her mind and wanted to back out. No more deal. Said, my father, we had a tkieskaf, an agreement. A deal is a deal. No backing out. Second, before the deal was actually signed, my father noticed that Shlomi is acting a bit tentative. So my father asked him, are you sure you have the money to pay for this deal? So answer Shlomi, I'll tell you the truth. I did have financing lined up, but one lender backed out, and I'm a bit short. I don't. How short? Asked my father. $2 million. Now, this story took place over 20 years ago, when a dollar was a dollar, and $2 million even today is still a fortune. He was short $2 million. So my father goes, He says, come back tomorrow. Let me think about it. Shlomi comes back the next day, and my father tells him he's giving him the $2 million in financing, a VTB, for 10 years at a competitive rate. And of course, with the $2 million cash that he didn't have to come up with, Shlomi was able to close the deal. That was the beginning of Shlomi building his business. And today, he's the owner of a not insubstantial nursing home company. If the Rebbeinu Shalom shortchanged Shlomi at all, it may be that eventually he got stuck becoming my mechutin. But otherwise, he's done quite well. That's all it takes, Rabbi Isai. That's all it takes. Looking outside our Dalet Amos, actually thinking about how we might be able to help someone, actually desiring that our neighbor succeeds, and worlds can be created. In Toronto specifically, all the Sheres HaPleita who became successful did so only because their friends and relatives went out of their way for them, took them as small partners in small deals, lent them money, and they built up. And it's my bracha tonight that we all be zoicha to the madrega of chemla, and that each and every one of us should eventually be able to play a role in helping a fellow Yid start a business, sustain a business. Mashiach will certainly not be far behind. It is now my kavod to introduce our guest speaker, Rav Moshe Bane. a Musmach of Yeshivas Neish Yisrael and NYU School of Law. He's retired as a law partner and who spent many, many years as president of the Orthodox Union, 40 years in fact. It is now my pleasure to introduce Moshe to speak to the audience.
Thank you. When I was invited to come speak this evening, I was a little confused because I'm really not appropriate to be speaking at a Halacha conference. Only once in my life I was asked to speak in any context that related to Halacha. There used to be an organization that's now dormant called AJOP. AJOP stood for the Association of Jewish Outreach Professionals. And every year they had a conference of all the people involved in Kiruv in North America, and even some from Europe and Eretz Yisrael. And they would all get together for a conference, for a 2 or 3 day conference, and they would have all kinds of sessions on Kiruv and other areas. And every couple of years they would ask me to speak. One year I get a call and they ask me to speak, and I say, okay, well, what do you want me to speak about? He goes, I want you to be on a panel that has to do with Halacha in Kiruv. I said, first of all, why would I be on that panel? And who else is on the panel? And other people on the panel included Rav David Cohen Shlita and other poskim. And I said, well, I don't know Halacha, that's not my field. He goes, you should participate. So I get up at this conference to speak in this panel, and each one of us was supposed to give a 10-minute presentation, and I shared the following story. I said, I'm not going to tell you what Halacha is, because that's not my field. I try to keep it, but I don't know what to tell other people to do. But let me tell you an incident that occurred to me, and I think it's relevant to today's program. Because when I look at today's program, whether it has to do with the halacha of being a business person, whether it has to do with business strategies and coping with different business challenges, whether it has to do with the idea of being part of a kehillah and helping each other, all of the similarities come down to a fundamental tension that an Orthodox businessman has that is unique. Most people in the world have a very clear identity. And most often, their identity is tied to their occupation. You have a tailor, you have a doctor, you have an attorney, you have a neuroscientist. And each one looks at themselves, that's who I am. Now, if I'm a mechanech, or I'm a rav, or I'm a dayan, then I look at myself, I'm an Oved Hashem, that's what I'm doing all day. And if I'm a typical businessman, I'm a businessman. But for a Ben Torah who's a businessman, like all of you who I've met here today and those who I did not have the opportunity to meet personally, there's two identities. On one hand, you're a business person. You're involved in commerce with all the challenges and opportunities that are attendant to that role. But at the same time, you're an Oved Hashem. And that creates tensions, and that creates complexities, and that creates challenges, but also creates opportunities. And one of the comments that came up over and over again today is when we're trying to build a community, and I'm a frum balabas, and I have a sense of achrayus to my community, what are the innovations? What are the creative approaches that I could be taking to help the kehillah? So I'm going to tell you the story that I shared at this panel on Halacha. I left yeshiva at the age of 22 to go to law school. I came to New York to NYU to go to law school. And my agenda of going to law school was to become a lawyer to do community work, to become an askim. All of my friends, or at least most of my friends, were serious masmidim, and they were all going to go on to become Roshei Kollel and Rabbanim. I wasn't a bum in yeshiva, but I was no major masmid. Like a few years ago, someone said to me, you must be looking forward to retirement because you'll be able to learn 14 hours a day. I said, when I was in yeshiva, I didn't learn 14 hours a day. I'm not going to do it when I retire. So I go to law school, and I learn within 2 months that every Jewish girl in the class was dating a non-Jew. And it's New York. There were tons of Jews. tons of male Jews and tons of female Jews. And all the women who I was meeting, all the students who were women who were Jewish, were all dating non-Jews. I said, I can't sit here idly by and look at this happening and not do something. What should I do? What should I do? So it was November, and Hanukkah was coming. I said, you know what would be a good idea? Let's do a Hanukkah dance for the law school. And we do a Hanukkah dance. All the Jewish students will get together for the evening, and maybe they'll start socializing with each other. Maybe they'll start dating each other. I said, is it mutter for me to arrange a Hanukkah dance? So I was new to New York. I'm originally from Montreal, then I had learned in Baltimore for many, many years. And I'm in New York, and I didn't know who to ask, but I was davening at that time on Shabbos in Rav David Cohen Shlita's shul. So I didn't know him, but I called him, and I explained who I was, and I explained the circumstance, and I said, so Rav, am I allowed to do a Hanukkah dance? And he says, I'm not answering, and he slams down the phone. That's what happened. So I call up my Rosh Hashiva, Rav Yaakov Weinberg. I tell him my idea, and I tell him the circumstance, and he goes, oh, Moshe, that's a great idea. That's a fantastic idea. I said, so Rebbe, I could do it? He goes, no, it's usher. I said, Rebbe, you just told me it's a great idea. He says, it's a great idea, but you can't do it. I go, why can't I do it? He says, because you could never tell a non-observant Jew to do something that if and when they become observant, you're going to say, you're not allowed to do that. So I said, okay, so Rebbe, let me get this clear. You're saying it's a good idea, it should happen, but I can't do it. He goes, yeah. So I go back to my room, and I start thinking about it, and I recall that the law school has clubs. There's a Black American club, and there's a Latino club, and there's an LGBT club, and all the clubs. There's no Jewish club. A third of the class is Jewish. I said, well, what are the criteria it takes to have a Jewish club? And what do you get out of being a club? And I find out you need to get 50 signatures of people who want to be members, and you need to get a faculty advisor. And if you get certified as a club, you get $10,000 to spend on club activities. So I go around and I get 50 students to sign the petition, and I go to an elderly professor. His name was Professor Greenberg, and I'm not sure he understood what I was talking about, but he signed the paper that he'd be the professor guide on the club. And then I go and I find out you have to write bylaws. So I write the bylaws of the club. Now that club, by the way, we're now 40 years later, Kamat, 38, 39 years later, it still exists. And if anybody read the bylaws, they would think that it was written by a drunkard. Because what do the bylaws say? What the bylaws say is that there are 3 divisions to this organization. There's a learning Torah division, there's a political action division, and there's a social events division. And there's a president of the club, and then each division has a director. And in the bylaws it says, and the president is not allowed to have anything to do with the social events department of this club. And I got it approved. I go over to one of the non-firm guys and I go, if I got you $10,000, would you do a Hanukkah party? And there was a Hanukkah party. So I tell that at this convention, and as I conclude, I turn to Rabbi Cohen, and I say, Rabbi Cohen, it's many years later, but can you tell me why you hung up the phone on me? And he said, don't you understand, when a rabbi doesn't answer your question, he's just saying, do it. But this question of identity is something that plagues us. And an event like today's event is an opportunity for us to declare that there really is no contradiction. And it really is not a competition between our identities. Our identity is one identity. Being a person involved in commerce, being a person involved in Parnasa, and being a Ben Torah are hainu hach. They're the exact same thing, because making a living and taking care of your family and taking care of others is avodas Hashem of the highest degree. And getting together and declaring it as a community, that we have this sense of this duality, it's an incredible thing. And part of that duality is a sense of being part of a community. We know that in Yiddishkeit, our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu has that duality between being an individual and being a member of a kehillah. It's a well-known drasha people talk about in Shemona Esrei. We start off our Shemona Esrei every day, 3 times a day, on Shabbos and Yom Tov 4 times. We start off by saying, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. And the question is, why doesn't it just say, Elokei Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? Why does it have to mention each one separately? So the Sfarim explain, because on one dimension, we're about to say Amidah quietly. It's a private Amidah. We're talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as an individual, peh in a sense that we can. But simultaneously, we are only there as part of a kehillah. And when you go through the tefillos of the Shemona Esrei, each one is a tzibur dika bakasha. And when you go through the Shemona Esrei, realizing that we're asking on behalf of the tzibur, slach lanu, shma koleinu, everything's in the plural, we could lose sight of the fact that we are an individual and we're talking to Hashem as an individual. And therefore, we begin our Shemona Esrei by reminding ourselves there was an Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, and Elokei Yaakov. And each one of the Avos had his own unique relationship with the Eibishter. Each one had a unique tefillah, a unique connection. And even though we're talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through our tefillah on Shemona Esrei as a collective Klal Yisrael, we also have the dimension of our individuality. Very often, it's the opposite that we lose sight of. That we begin to look at ourselves exclusively as an individual and lose sight of the fact that our avodah cannot be complete if we're not part of a kehillah. If we don't have a sense of responsibility to each other, we know that at Ma'amid Har Sinai, ki ish echad b'lev echad, Klal Yisrael's prerequisite to being able to makabel the Torah was that of a tzibur. Now, when I started working, I just retired after 38 years, I still had this tension. That on one hand, most of my chaverim are Klei Kodesh. Most of them are learning and teaching, being marbitz Torah, and I'm trying to. And Baruch Hashem, for the last several years, I've been able to do it almost exclusively, but most of the last several decades, I was a balabas. And even though I understand all the things that I've just shared with you, at the end of the day, I don't know. And I went to one of the Gedolim with this tension that I was suffering, and he pointed me out the following Gemara, and I want to share with you this Gemara. I had learned this Gemara before, but never appreciated what he was showing me. It's a Gemara in Tainus. The Gemara in Tainus says the following. Abba umna, havi osile shloma mimesve de rakia kol yoimai. This fellow, Abba umna, who we'll get to in a minute who he was, from Shemayim, they used to come and greet him every single day. The Gemara goes on. Ula Abaya, our famous Abaya, Kol Maila Yoim at the Shabta. There, from Shemayim, they would greet him once a week. Ula Rava, right? Abaya and Rava. Well, how about Rava? Kol Maila Yom at the Kippuri. To him, they came only in Yom Kippur. So, to Abba Umna, they came every day from Shemayim to say hello, to greet him. Abaya once a week, Rava once a year. Zok the Gemara, have a chash l'daita da Abaya. Mishum de Abba Umna. Abaya felt chalisha hadas. Why is HaKadosh Baruch Hu signaling to Abba Umna every day? I thought I was doing good. I thought I was teaching Klal Yisrael Torah. I thought I was going to be a link in the Messiah of Torah to Klal Yisrael, and I only get once a week. Abba Umna, he's not an Amara. He's not teaching Torah all day. Why is he getting this higher level of relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So Amrullah, they explained to him who Abba Umna was. Who was Abba Umna? He was a bloodletter, right? In those days, one of the ways of healing people was letting blood, taking out blood. What would he do? He said, number one, he was very makbid, that there was one room where men came to and one room where women came to. That was number one. Number two, he created a clothing for women that when they would come to him to have bloodlet, the clothing had a part, and all he had to do was see the skin where he was putting in the needle to take out the blood. That was number two. And number three, what did Abba Umna do? He said when someone came to him for his services, there was a kuppah in the waiting room. And if you had money, you put money in the kuppah. And if you didn't have money, you took money out of the kuppah. And that was his schus, why he was so chashiv to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be greeted once a week. That's the Gemara. It's a beautiful Gemara. How you could be a tzaddik as a balabas, but what is even more interesting that was pointed out to me was a second observation. Abaya had chalishas hadas, that he did not reach the madrega of Abba Umna. But when he heard about what Abba Umna was doing, he was not told of an exercise that he could not do himself. If this is what it takes to reach the level of ruchnius, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu could come to you every day, Abaya now had the roadmap. He could do it. Why didn't he change his profession? Even though his alternative, he thought was he was doing the holiest thing, he found out there was another way that he could be holier. And what we're learning here is Abaya could conclude that there was another way that was holier that wasn't in Torah, but that was his kaiches. And you have to take your kaiches and use your kaiches. His kaiches was to be a Marbitz Torah. Abba Umna's kaiches was to be a bloodletter. And therefore, it wasn't the profession that was going to determine your level of ruchnias, your level of kedusha. And Abaya realized, I have to stay in my lane, because for me, this is the highest kedusha I'm going to reach. Abba Umna is lucky. Each one of us has kaiches. Each one of us has strengths. Each one of us has talents. Each one of us has opportunities to be Mekadei Shem Shemayim. And the role that we are playing is the role we should be playing if it's in line with who we are. There's a very famous Rameir Shapiro of Zatzal on last week's Parsha. He asked the question, Moshe Rabbeinu is walking down with his sheep and comes across the sneh, the burning bush. And here it is, the first encounter between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Moshe Rabbeinu, the prophet that is unparalleled in Jewish history, like Kam b'Yisrael k'Moshe Oid. And you would imagine that the initial words between Moshe Rabbeinu and HaKadosh Baruch Hu are going to be profound, are going to be monumental. This is the first dialect that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be transmitting to Moshe Rabbeinu, the Meira of Klal Yisrael. And what was the first thing? What were the first words? Was it some theology, some hashkafa, some disclosure? The first words are, take your shoes off, your feet, because the place where you're standing, kaideshu. That's the profound words that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was sharing with Moshe Rabbeinu. So Rameir Shapiro says, let me explain to you how profound those words are. Those words are telling each one of us, at each stage in our lives, the land that we happen to be standing on, the role we're playing, the place we find ourselves, that's Adam Kadosh for us. And that is a profound idea that we need to remember, that we need to recall. I want to conclude with just one final thought, talking about the challenges of being simultaneously an Oved Hashem and a businessman. Because there is often a danger. Because very often we become so invested in our role as a business person, whether it be owning a factory that has 1,000 people who are working under our tutelage, whether it be the enormous amounts of money that we could give to support Maistas, HaTorah, and Chesed, and over time, that becomes our identity. Not the Avodas Hashem per se, it's the role we're playing. And we're often confronted with a challenge. You know, over the years, not so much during my legal profession, but in my community work, I would come across people, sometimes even Klei Kodesh, who would do things that were so improper legally, and sometimes they even landed up in prison. And I would often wonder, this doesn't make any sense to me. These are wonderful people, I know them for years and years. Why would they do something so improper? And after I thought about it and studied them and talked to them, I began to realize that they had so invested themselves in their role that when they came to a confrontation where they were not going to be able to retain their yeshiva as a Rosh Yeshiva or their business as a businessman, unless they did some impropriety, they had no choice but to cross the line, because doing otherwise would be a loss of who they were. It was almost like they were facing their own demise. And this was a conflict that they had, and that is what led them astray. And as my children were growing up, I had a conflict, because on one hand, I wanted them to be brought up with ambition. I wanted them to have hasagas. I wanted them to strive for excellence, whether it be in learning, whether it be in Klei Kodesh, whether it be in business. But on the other hand, I saw you have this enormous vulnerability if you're ambitious, if you achieve things of greatness. And I was trying to figure out, how do I synthesize the goal of ambition and achievement with the goal of not losing your identity to succumb to almost inevitable challenge when you're faced with a challenge like that. And I came up with a term, and the term was the glory of failure. And every fourth or fifth or sixth Shabbos at the Shabbos table, because we all know that the Shabbos table is the ultimate classroom for our children, every fourth or fifth or sixth week, I would give my children a lesson in our family values. I said, I want you to understand, in this family, the ultimate chashivas, the time I will be most proud of you, is when I see that you're willing to accept failure rather than doing something wrong, because there's nothing greater than the glory of failure. That's the ultimate achievement that a Ben Torah could achieve, to be willing to fail and give up parts of what they had assumed as their role in order to keep halacha, in order to make sure you don't violate and create a chilul Hashem. So I want to give us all a bracha. I want to give myself a bracha. I want to give my children a bracha. I want to give all of you and your children a bracha. That you should be able to thrive in your professions and your occupations and your businesses. You should be tremendously matzliach. And you should see that as an avenue to be part of a kehillah and do tremendous things for the kehillah, but always retain the core identity that it's part of Avodas Hashem. Shkoyach.
In conclusion, I want to thank all our speakers, all our panelists, our out-of-town guests, our local guests, entire Toronto community. I want to also give a special thank you to the Torah Anytime team. They flew in here to record all the shiurim and all the panels throughout the day. Torah Anytime spreads over 12 million hours of Torah a day throughout the world. They have 1 million users all over the world. Everyone, whoever doesn't have the app, take a look. I encourage you to download their app. They have a lot of new programs. Rebbe Anytime, Jewish Anytime. They have a lot of different programs. They have a yard site program where they're accepting names and yard site dates. I really, really appreciate their partnership and that they came and recorded everything. Thank you. We will have benching and Ma'ariv outdoors. Music will be played and dessert is served on buffet in the back corner. Thank you again. Have a good evening.